Hello, welcome to our virtual session this evening. West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner John Campion, where we'll be talking about this year's budget proposals. I'm joined by a number of colleagues who I'll let introduce themselves.
Thank you. Good evening. Tracey, Onslow, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for West Mercia.
Hello, I'm Pippa Mills. I'm the Chief Constable of West Mercia Police.
Good evening. I'm Julian. I'm the Deputy Chief Constable.
So the purpose of tonight is to hear a little more about the budget proposals for the next financial year that we have launched and are currently consulting upon. It's an opportunity for us to have some questions from the public that we've received in advance, and for anybody who wants to comment during tonight's live stream. All of my full details in terms of budget proposals are on my Facebook, on my Instagram and on my webpage. The consultation runs until a week on Monday. We also will be keeping this live stream on the Facebook and Instagram pages if anybody wants to watch back in the future. We aim to run for about 40 minutes or so, depending on the questions. And then if there is a question that somebody wanted to put tonight and they weren't able to do, if you post it in the comments underneath this stream, we will make sure that we get you an answer. As Commissioner over the last 5 years, I've worked hard to ensure that I strengthen my commitment to invest in West Mercia Police to ensure that communities receive efficient and effective policing, backing West Mercia Police with the resources they need to keep us safe. Next month I will be going before West Mercia's Police and Crime Panel, offering for them confirmation of my budget proposals that I'm currently consulting upon. At the heart of that proposal, I am asking the public to pay slightly more. I am proposing an increase in the police element of the precept of just under 4%, which for an average household is just about £9.50, which were per year, and that works out to about 80 pence a week per average household. And I want 80 pence a month, per household. But I want the public to understand the benefit, the so what, around why we're asking the public to pay slightly more, but also what we will do with the existing resources and the growth in the resources that I am proposing. As part of that growth, and not exclusively, because I'm sure we'll touch on it as part of some of the questions, we will see an additional 125 police officers recruited in West Mercia on top of the 400 that we have recruited over the last 4 years, growing the establishment to some of the highest levels of police officers that we've ever had in West Mercia. We will see investments such as £1 million into prevention. We also will see £1 million invested in greening the police vehicle fleet with electric vehicle charging infrastructure and the provision of more electric vehicles. A budget that has grown significantly since the £202 million that I inherited in 2016 through now over £255 million. So that's a very brief introduction. All the detail, as I said earlier, is on my website, and I'm very grateful for those of you that have submitted questions in advance. But as I said, if there are questions you want answered, please do include them in the comments below. Chief, I think one of the places to start is around the community concern, the things that the community care about but don't always, might not be the biggest risk to them, but the thing that they care about the most. And one of them is around speeding and dangerous drivers. A number of those consultations that we've run, both this year, last year and over the last 5 years, have absolutely had road safety at the top of the issues list. In your mind, in the big strategic thing that the budget is, how do you see what we're proposing to address that top community priority in terms of harm caused on the roads in West Mercia?
Thanks, John. So I think what's really important is to recognise that this is building on the investment of previous years. So in 19, 20, 21, an additional 19 officers went into our roads policing team. But I think in terms of addressing the concerns around speeding, etc., it's more around the road safety team, and I'm really pleased to see additional investment in the road safety team this year to grow that. And the great thing about that team is the evidence-led approach that they take, using data, using community feedback, to identify where those dangerous places are, where the enforcement is best done, and then to identify which are the best tactics. So whether that's an enforcement van, whether it's average speed cameras. I'm really pleased I'm going out with that team tomorrow in terms of how they deploy to community concerns.
You're going to tell the listeners where they're going? Or where
Probably best not to. But in terms, it's not just enforcement, it's also the prevention and the education, and I think it's that whole rounded approach that's really important, that makes the success of that team. But as you say, a genuine community concern that we want to respond to. The local policing community charter, I think antisocial driving and speeding, top of almost without exception every single parish and town priority. So really critical that my safer neighbourhood teams own the response to that with the specialist support of that road safety team.
The link to that, Roger Knight raised a question via email around crime rates locally low. Really great to see. We've seen crime go down and the number of incidents go down. And but he makes the point around seeing a police officer absolutely adds to that sense of being safe. And linking to the point that you were just making, how in a budget where we are proposing lots of money into investigations and specialist investigators and really ensuring that we can deliver the justice for victims, but also those who have perpetrated crimes being held accountable for their actions, how does that also translate to ensure that communities will see greater visibility and accessibility of their local safer neighbourhood teams and colleagues?
So, as you say, Commissioner, I think really important to recognise that crime is low, and West Mercia is a really safe place to live and to visit. And since arriving in force nearly 4 months ago, I've spent a lot of time out and about, speaking to communities, speaking to members of the public, and I understand how important that visible and accessible policing is to them. So the frontline investment is really welcomed, and in terms of my priorities, in terms of coming in as the new Chief Constable, to building on the existing force mission around protecting people from harm, but adding on about the quality policing service. And for me, the quality policing service is measured by how the public and how our communities feel they're being policed. So 3 priorities around keeping communities safe, delivering the excellent service, but then also making it a great organisation, a great place to work, and then people feeling happy and content and satisfied and motivated at work then reflects back out to deliver that quality service. So my officers and staff skilled, trained, equipped, and really able to provide excellent policing services.
And really building on the investment in recent years that you've already alluded to in terms of frontline police officers, response officers, roads police, other specialisms, that next stage of investment in investigation really bringing greater benefit from the investment already made.
And just before we move on from that as well, so if there's people out there who have got issues in their local community around speeding, so a great way for them to feed that in now would be through their parish councils as well, who can then feed it in, and you know, sometimes it's that evidence gathering as well, isn't it, for the police? That would be a good way for them to report that now, or directly with their local teams.
Yeah, absolutely. A community charter, a commitment to every 3 months to not only to listen to what those local priorities are, but then to say, you know, what we've done about them in the last period. But Dep, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say the other thing that we've been doing is listening to our staff and our safer neighbourhood officers, and to some extent our response officers are spending quite a large proportion of their time investigating crime. Now that's a really important job and a really core part of what the police do, but we have been concerned that it's taking them away from visibility and accessibility to communities, being able to respond when you need them. And so we really welcome the investment of a large number of investigators, not only because they'll give better service and we'll be able to investigate more professionally, but because it will free up those neighbourhood officers and response officers to be there for you and solving the problems and getting to the root cause of it to prevent it happening in the future.
Thanks. We've also had a question in, and it's a lot around public perception that minor crimes, and I hear it sometimes when I'm out and about that people say, oh, I didn't bother reporting it because I just thought they'd give me a crime number. I didn't think they'd do anything about it. I didn't think the police would do anything about it. So I'm just wondering, for those victims of low-level crime, what is your advice to them? Because they know it isn't a 999 issue, but what is your advice to them? And particularly, because obviously crime affects people in different ways, when it comes to the more vulnerable victims, what are the best courses of action for them?
So I think really important to dispel that misconception. So every incident, every crime that's reported to us, we assess it. We use something called Thrive, which is quite a technical term, but effectively we assess it against threat, harm and risk. But then vulnerability is a really important part of that assessment. And so, I'm really pleased to say that where the vulnerability of a victim is high, then that they get the proportionate response to that. We also assess for investigative opportunities, because obviously it's really important we investigate the crimes where there are leads, whether it's CCTV, whether it's witnesses, etc. But I mean, the only the best piece of advice I can give is that if you don't tell us, we can't do anything about it. And even if there aren't those investigative opportunities and we simply use it for intelligence purposes, unless we understand where that crime's happening, then in terms of me being able to deploy my officers and resources to respond to it, it's difficult. I'm really pleased to say we've made it even easier for people to report crime to us. So obviously in an emergency, always calling 999, but then our being able to report crime and incidents online is easier than ever. So in terms of our website, and then obviously 101 in a non-emergency as well. Anything to add, Julian?
Yeah, just please don't sit there thinking I don't want to bother the police. What's happened is important to you, and it's really important we know about it, and so we can respond appropriately and make sure you get appropriate support.
So linked to that, I think we've got a shared vision, Chief, around ensuring that we prevent crime and harm being caused, rather than just having to detect it as we've been talking about. I'm putting in £1 million as part of the budget that we will use around supporting that, progressing the preventative agenda, and I think we both mean truly preventative measures, i.e. that primary prevention rather than just stopping repeat prevention. That's a drop in the ocean compared to the much wider spend that West Mercia has. How do you see this budget progressing our shared vision that actually we need to be preventing more and responding, and then having to respond to less?
So you're absolutely right in terms of that shift to prevention. It's a wholesale change in terms of the forces operating model, and I've been really clear coming in as chief that I want to see that shift commence really strongly this year. And so in terms of we have a target operating model, in the investment in prevention through this budget increase this year will enable that shift to take place, building on, as you say, the prevention resources put in place in previous years. But I've got the national lead on prevention sitting next to me, so it would be crazy not to pass across to Julian.
So is the chief right?
Yes, she is right, absolutely, and I'm really pleased to be working on making sure that right across this organisation, everything we do, the way that we work, is all about thinking about things being prevented in the first place. And of course it's important that where crime is entrenched and we've got really bad people out there, you'd expect us to put the very best of our resources to stopping serious crime, serious violence from happening. But it's really important that we work with our partners and we work with communities to look at the whole picture. And yes, the police have got a very important job to do to prevent bad problems from getting any worse. But unless we work with other agencies, with children's services, with the health service, to intervene early when we collectively see the beginnings of a problem, and getting upstream to make sure that communities, individuals, young people are thriving and don't get pulled into being involved in crime or being vulnerable to crime. And that's not an easy thing to do, but we're absolutely determined to shift the weight of our focus towards preventing you as members of our communities being a victim in the first place.
How does it work in terms of the chief is Chief of West Mercia Police? I'm Commissioner as the governance and have a wider community safety role, but a lot of the answers of us being successful are with councils, health bodies and others. How do you see this investment and the progress of our aspiration to help support but also complement others' work? Because gone are the days of the police going in and saying this is our priority, let's do this type thing, and then retrench after we've been unsuccessful. How do you see it deliver true system change rather than just project-based, making us feel better in the short term?
The secret is in working together effectively, number one, and secondly, using the science. And there's using the science is not something that public service has been very strong at necessarily. I have to say that those in the world of public health and the health service are far advanced from us in the police service, and we're taking a leaf out of their book. So for me, it's about getting a joint picture, intelligence picture of where the vulnerabilities are in our communities, and it's about using the science and evidence base about how to intervene really effectively at different stages in the life cycle. And that means not just agencies working together, but charities and third sector organisations. Some of the organisations that you're likely to be commissioning with that £1 million that's going to go towards prevention, sometimes they're better placed than we are to help those that need support. We're choosing some of our very best leaders to work in partnership and do our bit for that collective effort to reduce harm in the longer term.
I think, John, it's fair to say is that you and I discussed as well having a shared prevention strategy, so a shared approach. So there are things that only the police can do, but there are things that together we can achieve more. And then recognising the complexity of West Mercia in terms of the 3 counties, and there aren't many things that are West Mercia, and so drawing really closely on those local relationships as well. So not everything would work everywhere, but as Julian said, it's not just our strongest leaders in prevention, but our really strong local leadership, really strong local relationships, and not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about fraud, I think, now.
Yes, yeah, I think one of the questions that we get asked about a lot is around fraud and internet crime. And on the subject of prevention, this is probably one of the areas where prevention is absolutely key, because the chances of a police officer being around when you're sent that strange email is very unlikely. So I'm just wondering how this budget is going to help with that, around fraud and cybercrime, which of course is an increasing area.
So cybercrime is crime, just happens online. Makes it challenging to investigate, because whereas the perpetrator may not be local, they may be national or even international, and I think our tried and tested approach is around publicising, because the scams change very quickly, and so using our neighbourhood links, our neighbourhood matters to publicise what the latest scam is, what the latest approach, and I think educating the public is really important with this. But I'm really pleased in terms of the investment this year of an additional 5 officers into cybercrime, into a digital desk. So investigating those crimes and providing support to the investigators locally. Anything to add on that, Julian?
I would say that part of our joint ambition is to upskill the whole of our workforce around digital investigation and fraud. So we're going to be investing in further training and in giving our officers and staff the tools to do the job more effectively.
Because there's also been an investment in the Cyber Resilience Centre, hasn't there, which is a regional centre for if anybody with business cybercrime is another resource for them to use, and that's had a big investment as well, which is something we'll be working in partnership with, and your officers are linked in there as well, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. And as you said, around neighbourhoods, it's not just the local officers that you see; it's the regional capability, as you say, through the cyber team in the regional organised crime unit, and then also the National Crime Agency dealing with the highest level threats, ransomware attacks and things like that, and against business community. So it's not just what happens locally in West Mercia; it's how we work as a whole crime prevention system.
Chief, you've touched on your proposals for the additional 125 officers in terms of just referred to the digital desk, for example. More widely, that commitment to recruiting 125 additional officers, and we should be clear, they don't just get unboxed from somewhere and they're good to go on day one. It's the training process and the organisation growing it does take time. But what's your vision around how those 125 officers will be deployed in very broad terms, but also how you see their deployment, their recruitment directly benefiting and maximised for the public?
So as you say, it's not just the 125 this year. It's building on the 400 over the last 4 years, and then recognising that people retire and come to the end of their service, and so we recruit lots of officers every single year and staff. And I think for me it's really important about getting the standards right and choosing the right people, because I think it's about 1 in 10 people who apply to join are successful in joining the organisation. So maintaining those standards, making sure we're getting really quality recruits who are really representative of the communities we serve in West Mercia, and they're really values driven, having that real public service ethos and motivation for joining. And then when they join us, giving them the best training, so either officers joining us with degrees or on a 3-year programme of training, at the end of which they get a degree. So making sure they've got the best training to equip them to deliver those quality policing services to our community. And then when in the organisation, making sure they've got really the best leadership, because they deserve it, and really clear direction around what I want them to do as Chief Constable and what their mission is. Whilst
we have talked about police officer numbers in recent years, I've tried to avoid it because it shouldn't matter to the public how many police officers we have. It's having enough to be able to the public see them often enough to feel safe if they need the service, that they are there fortunately, and the like. And you've alluded to that in several parts of your different answers around the large organisation that West Mercia is, and the many parts, from very specialist crime investigation through to high-end physical tactics, through to roads policing, counter-terrorism policing, all the different parts of, including dog sections and the like. One questioner has raised in advance something that we don't have. Why doesn't the force have any police forces? And the second part of his question was, how will the proposed budget address rural crime? So will one of your proposals be to institute a mounted section as the organisation grows?
So not every force has every specialist capability. So I think it's probably around 12 or 13 forces that actually have equine units, mounted units. So although we don't have them in force, we have access to them through mutual aid arrangements. So we could effectively hire, borrow the horses from another from another force. And in the same way, you mentioned police dogs. We've got specialist capability in terms of victim recovery dogs. So where someone needs a support or assistance, looking for victims who are lost, and we lend hire those dogs out to other forces, because not every force can have every specialist capability. I genuinely see the benefit of horses in terms of the profile for public order, but the investment, my professional assessment is the investment required for stabling, the training of the officers to ride the horses. It wouldn't be reasonable in West Mercia, but that's not to downplay the horses, because I think they do a fantastic job, and my experience in the Met was they're a great community engagement tool. Yeah. So we'd never not get some horses if we needed them specifically to deliver something, but in terms of having our own capability, I think there's better ways to utilise the investment.
Great environmentally as well. Really great miles per gallon. And what about Adrian's second part of his question around your view, in a very high level, how you think the investments and changes that we're proposing will help address rural crime, or that perception of rural crime in the service that our communities receive?
So obviously our rural communities really significant in West Mercia. And again, having gone out and spent some time and understood how our rural and business crime officers and problem-solving hubs respond to those concerns, work around prevention, and then in terms of encouraging reporting, as we spoke earlier with Tracey, giving the confidence of our rural communities to report crime and concerns to us. So alongside the investigative investment, which will obviously deliver more outcomes for the public, that releasing the frontline officers to spend more time and the neighbourhood teams to spend more time within their communities, responding to those concerns. I think that's really important.
And I would say that local officers were great believers in local policing and neighbourhood policing, and those local officers are the chief constables of their parishes, and they've got the power. They're empowered to bring in the specialists. So if it's a speeding problem, it might be the roads policing specialists. If it's serious crime, the detectives, and bringing in also those problem solvers. And we're trying to encourage our neighbourhood officers to really use all of the skills and assets available to help solve local problems, because crime starts and ends at a local level in a neighbourhood.
Linked to rural crime, Dusty from Shifnal has asked if there could be more focus relating to wildlife crime such as hare coursing and poaching. And as members of the rural community are feeling worried by the potential threats made to them, and indeed the wider damage caused in often quite isolated parts of our force area.
Yeah, so building on that, really important that people report it to us if they see anything suspicious, so we can respond. In terms of using disruptive methods, obviously hare coursing, quite often linked to organised criminality. So we use every single tactic to address that, working with other forces, because not just limited to West Mercia, a lot of cross-border criminality and to do with that. So really clear commitment to me, recognising the impact that it has on our rural communities to ensure we respond to that.
I was speaking the other day to one of our officers in the problem-solving hub who was tackling some hare coursing, and we couldn't prove the hare coursing, but he was getting out all the law books and using every bit of legislation, and we actually made a successful prosecution for a firearms offence. So our officers are really keen to use every tool and tactic and trick in the book to keep rural communities safe.
And often some of these things like hare coursing happen late at night or overnight, often when lots of people are in bed and asleep. But I've been with some of your teams in some of the large operations that you do put on that target it, that sometimes the public won't see the quite significant resources at times that are dedicated to preventing but also detecting those that do. How does West Mercia ensure that the activity against crime such as this that might not be in plain sight in terms of the effort to reduce get communicated to them?
So really important, as you say, some great work, and I was with the Rural and Business Crime team at Spetchley Park in Worcestershire, speaking to tenant farmers who were praising the response, specifically overnight in response to some concerns that they'd raised around hare coursing. And as you say, it's not just the rural and business crime officers who respond, it's not just a safer neighbourhood team, it was the local policing team from Worcester who came out and responded and made some arrests. So not just those local teams. But in terms of the community charter, just really important that we publicise and we tell people what's happening. And we spoke about neighbourhood matters, and I just really encourage everyone to sign up to neighbourhoodmatters.co.uk, which is effectively where you can tell us where you live, what you're interested in locally, and then it enables you to see what we're up to and then you to raise concerns back to us. So I just really encourage people to sign up to that.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting when you've just mentioned their neighbourhood matters, because is that another good route for people to mention sort of that ongoing, sometimes low level but antisocial behaviour, that type of crime that tends to keep coming up? And I don't think we've ever done one of these hold into account where there hasn't been a question about antisocial behaviour. So would that be a route for that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And through the community charter where we've gone out to the parishes, I think antisocial behaviour probably one of the top three almost without exception. So recognising the impact that has on communities. So this year the additional investment into our safer neighbourhood teams, but we've also got the problem solving teams, the early interventions with young people, and also the schools work. Problem-solving hubs, who, as the Deputy just said, draws on the force-wide resources, whether it's our operational policing units, those regional resources that we've already spoken about, and also, just to repeat that, investment in investigations, freeing up our local safer neighbourhood teams to deal with those really troublesome antisocial behaviour issues.
We've had quite a technical question in from a resident around some of the financial spend, and I don't think it's useful getting into the details because we've published all of the information online, as it were. But to take some of the themes from what they've asked, one of them is around how now what the financial impact of the split with Warwickshire is, and that's probably one that I'll take from the beginning. In terms of the vast majority of our services have now separated. There's only a very small amount of services, and indeed we're now in a position where we are no longer subsidising Warwickshire. They are paying for any services they are consuming. We are able to ensure that resources that are allocated to us are being deployed for the communities that are funding them, and you, Chief, have full operational directional control over your organisation rather than having to share it with a neighbouring Chief Constable. The other question, or one of the parts of the other question, relates to the balance between frontline police officers and back office. They describe it as just the back office, but in our organisation, in West Mercia Police, there is a quite a civilianised organisation compared to some, and I'm just interested in your view as to how that budget maintains a traditional position of being a more civilianised force than perhaps others are, and whether or not that will change during the life of this medium-term budget.
So I think it's fair to say, obviously, we really welcome the investment of additional officers, both through the National Police Uplift Programme, but then obviously through additional local investment, and that's absolutely fantastic, because I always ask for more police officers, Commissioner. But recognising, as you say, that we do have significant numbers of police staff who provide those support services which enable the frontline operational delivery. And do you, anything to add on that?
Well, I would say, and linking it back to your previous question, I came in at a time before the decision was made to split from Warwickshire, but it, just practically speaking, it was very difficult to generate the kind of decisions we needed to invest in things like information technology, and where it's left us is a good number of years behind where we should be in our technology. Now, there's no point in having extra police officers if they don't have the tools to do the job. So we have a clear programme over the next 3 years of modernising our service, getting a really strong, modern, up-to-date, fast, even faster than the criminals, infrastructure for our officers in terms of IT. And that'll give us a platform to deliver much more efficient back office services. So we have a clear plan led by the Chief's direction to make our support services more efficient over the next 3 years.
And is that going to the comment about the problem is police officers, they all end up sitting doing paperwork, they're all trapped in the stations doing paperwork, and is it that sort of investment that's going to bust that myth, if you like, that's what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I spoke about building a great organisation in terms of the officers skilled, equipped and enabled, and the information technology that the Dep described there. All the officers having the mobile devices, so they don't have to come back to the police station to investigate a crime and record a crime. When people see the officers out and about on a mobile device, they're not on their personal phones. They're actually out, and I'm really encourage them to stay out in communities, recognising that people want them to be visible and accessible. So reduce the need for them to come back by equipping them with the technology they need.
And there's always going to be a certain amount of paperwork, bureaucracy that goes around doing our job, which is investigating crime. What we can't accept as public servants is police officers sitting looking at a wheel of doom going around on a computer screen. So we've got to get better digital services to serve the public better.
Somebody via a pre-submitted question asking around, they use the language of allocate a portion of the budget to providing a training camp or such like to keep police officers and core handlers, they name, aware of current legislation and up to date. But the question more widely, you're a growing organisation in West Mercia Police, you're ever-changing challenges and legislation and community issues. How are you using part of the uplift and investment to ensure, and as you've just described, match fit for dealing with the task at hand?
So I spoke about how we'd select, recruit and train the new officers coming in, but I think really important that we focus on the continuing professional development of our existing officers and staff. So I'm really pleased that we'll be able to invest an additional 12 officers into our learning and development function. So it's not just about numbers, but it's making sure that they're trained with the right skills to deliver that quality policing service that I'm so keen on. Linking into the College of Policing nationally, and then also our local training delivery, and whether that's in person or virtual, using our improving IT systems, then really important that people, as I say, are skilled and equipped to do the job that they need to. And I think looking back over the last the period of COVID, over the last nearly 2 years now, you know, the rapid shifts in legislation changes. Our frontline, they deserve to understand and be kept up to date with the best training. So I'm really pleased that the budget's going to enable that uplift in training.
Excellent.
Well, we've talked a lot about sort of the more volume crime around antisocial behaviour, speeding, things that affect a considerable number of people. But something that probably, hopefully, affects fewer people is violence against women and girls, and there's obviously been some very high-profile cases in the media recently. How is the funding going to help that sector of our community to feel safer?
So, as you say, some really high-profile cases, and that I'm really, really conscious of that need to rebuild trust in our communities following those national incidents, and that need to rebuild confidence and legitimacy is clear. You know, despite the adverse impact of that on trust that I think we've all experienced, we're already seeing increased levels of reporting. So we've seen about spiking incidents in the national media, and that's been replicated in the force as in every other force. But those referrals is really important, that people have the confidence to tell us what's wrong, and that the investment in the violence against women and girls agenda and the investigations will enable us to be in a really good position to respond and deal with those perpetrators. And then also alongside that, so that's the public element of it. But then for me as the chief, really important that I have a healthy environment in the workforce, and so an additional investment into my professional standards department to ensure that we've got the right people in the organisation, and where we don't, very small number of people within the organisation, that they no longer are members of the organisation because they lack the integrity to have the trust and confidence of the public.
Chief, we've talked about lots of different subjects today, and by no means exhaustive around the amount of areas of business and community issues that the organisation is focused on tackling. In 5-10 years' time, when you look back and you see the investments we're making today, are there some measures of success you'd look back and say this is the thing I'm proud of because it has achieved X? So that slightly longer term look at things.
So, I mean, as I've said, we really enjoy high levels of public confidence in West Mercia, something I would never take for granted, and something that I'm really keen during my tenure as Chief Constable to continue to improve. So communities who are confident that we'll be there when they need us to be there, that they know who their local officers are, that they know how to contact them, and that they have that confidence that their local officers understand what's important to them. So I think if I look back and I leave a more confident communities across West Mercia, then I think that's what success would look like for me.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank yourself and the Deputy for joining us today, and Tracey for assisting with the questions, and thank the public for watching at home. As I mentioned earlier, I am running a consultation on my budget proposals that run through until 9 o'clock on Monday the 24th of January. You can find the full details on my website, westmercia-pcc.gov.uk. You will also be able to take part in the consultation to see whether or not you support my proposals. People should also keep an eye on my social media channels for other opportunities to get involved to ensure that your voice is at the heart of policing in West Mercia. I'm clear as Commissioner that I will back the force with the right resources to ensure that they have the tools to do the job, focusing on ensuring those resources are used efficiently and effectively, delivering the dividend for the public where we are asking them to pay more. Hopefully members of the public will have been able to hear tonight some of the examples of where we see those improvements being delivered, and I will play my part as Commissioner not only with the funding but also in terms of supporting and holding the force to account for delivering them. And I would also remind anybody who wanted to ask a question, who is maybe watching it back afterwards, if you leave that question in the comments below, we will ensure you will get an answer. I'd like to thank you again for listening and wish you all a good evening.